So at that conference on planetary emergencies, when Edward Teller, the father of the H-bomb, stood up, he proposed a similar sunscreen. And he said, if we can block 1% of incoming solar radiation and reflect it back into space, we will neutralize global warming. I have some very good researchers working for me, and they have very recently come up with a paper, a study done at the request of the U.S. government by the Lawrence Livermore Lab, the national laboratory in the United States. And they looked at this and they said, we can do this. It will cost us $1 billion a year. And that's 1% of the $100 billion a year it will cost our economy if we have to curtail fossil fuel use back to 1990 levels to slow global warming. Oh, sure, we can go to the solar age and alternative technologies that you know and I know are available. And of course, the oil cartel doesn't want us to do that. So here's an idea. We spray this sunscreen, we cool the planet slightly, and we can go on burning fossil fuels and the corporations can go on making their profits. An environmental consultant named Mike Castle, who consults to the U.S. government and other corporations in the United States, got in touch with me and thought, maybe this is what's going on. And then he discovered a patent, actually taken out and awarded to one of the big aerospace defense contractors in the United States, Hughes Aerospace, patent 1990000513145. Stratospheric well-back seating for reduction of global warming. A process to reflect infrared energy back into space. And this patent called for chemicals to be sprayed into the greenhouse gas layer, wait for this, 22,000 feet and higher. What were they going to spray? Oxides of metal. Which oxide? Aluminum oxide. Now you're saying, well, that's a heck of a lot of airplanes flying a lot of missions to spray that kind of material. So we turned to the United States Air Force, and you know what I found? They happen to own over 800 tanker aircraft, KC-135 and KC-10 aircraft. Exactly the planes that we have positively identified in hundreds of photographs and miles of videotape as the aircraft spraying these chemtrails. So could this really be happening? I mean, we have the study, we have the airplanes, we have the money, we have the patent, and we have the primary ingredient, aluminum. Well, we also have scientific proof. Because the people of Espanola, Ontario did not sit by and take the spraying in their community and resulting sickness among their families and children lying down. This is an Ojibwe community, about 80 miles to the west of Sudbury, Ontario. And in March last year, they began noticing these jets flying, these crisscross patterns overhead, and they came down with joint pain and stiffness, often on the left side of their bodies, extreme upper respiratory problems, gastrointestinal problems, illness throughout the community. And then they saw low-flying aircraft come over, C-130s, spraying a red powderish material. My colleague went up there at that time and collected a sample just after the latest incident. We had it tested. Hundreds and hundreds of pathogenic molds and fungi in that spray, that low-level spray. But what about the higher-level spray? The people of Espanola raised such a ruckus that the Ministry of Environment Ontario was forced to get involved, and they ran tests on rainwater following the heavy spray days. And guess what they found? They found carbon black, which the United States Air Force says they use for weather modification. They found hundreds of molds, fungi, but most of what they found was aluminum. 7 times the safe levels. Aluminum at levels the North Lab said would kill fish. We have the lab test, we have the study, It matches the Hughes patent. It matches what Edward Teller and Freeman Dyson and others were calling for. And it certainly looks to me tonight that what we are seeing is an attempt, a desperate attempt, at atmospheric modification. But weather is also being modified. We ask the United States, what the heck's going on? And they say, here's our report, Owning the Weather, 2025.
I'm Noam Chomsky. You're watching Working TV on cable.
As yet, my researchers and I have found absolutely no indication that the pathogens that are turning up in the gel samples, the cobweb material, have anything whatsoever to do with weather or environmental modification. There seems to be a second program at work here. In January of this year, there was a high-level summit conference. You may not have read about it in the local newspapers or heard about it on the CBC for some reason or other. This was a conference on the changing demographics on this planet, the aging population, and its threat to corporate profits and to defense budgets in particular. We had the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank representatives were there, very high-level people, and they were discussing what in the world are we going to do with the aging population. At least those are the words they used. Other words that have been used in the past are useless eaters. People who become elderly and no longer contribute monetarily to society and become a burden on society in terms of social assistance and especially Medicare. And as that becomes the preponderance in our population, there is a lot of concern among corporations in particular about their bottom line. The eugenics movement got its start in 1907 in the United States when the first eugenics law was passed there. And by 1944, 40,000 so-called insane or feeble-minded people had been forcibly sterilized. Another 22,000 by as recently as 1963. Now, in the 1920s, the Rockefeller Foundation, who became a principal promoter of depopulation, called for the mass sterilization and elimination of minority populations in the United States. And to head their program, they chose the fascists Ernest Rudin and Franz Kallman. Of course, it was Rockefeller Standard Oil that got together with I.G. Farben during that war. It became virtually the same corporation. It was Farben who made the nerve gas that killed more than 6 million Jewish people. Rudin himself went on to become part of the Nazi state and became president of the Worldwide Eugenics Federation. His sterilization law was adapted by the United States as law in July 1933 as a model with Hitler's signature attached. Kallman went on to head the American Society of Human Genetics, the Human Genome Project you've been hearing so much about recently. You haven't heard about its Nazi antecedents. That's a $3 billion effort, of course, to map DNA by the year 2003, and they're well on their way. That's going to be pretty nifty because apparently we'll be able to identify genetically caused diseases, go in there and tinker around and eliminate those diseases. What they're not stressing in the news reports is that we'll also be able to identify race-specific diseases so that we can attack specific populations of people with diseases that will only kill them. In the 1950s, the U.S. eugenics movement moved literally into Rockefeller's family offices. Lawrence Rockefeller became head of the New York City Blood Council and then International Blood Banking. These are the eugenics people. 1960s, General William Draper. He supplied credit to the Nazis during World War II, and now he started the Draper Fund. The Vietnam generals we've all heard about, Maxwell Taylor, William Westmoreland, who headed that genocide and dioxin defoliation campaign in Vietnam. They were members of the Population Crisis Committee of the William Draper Fund. In 1964, the former commanding general, U.S. Army Chemical Corps, listed bioweapons favored by the U.S. military. There's a long list, I won't go into it, but let's note brucellosis, influenza, Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Congressional investigations in 1977 and 1994 documented 50 years of biowarfare experimentation, as I mentioned earlier. 1969, a man named George Bush, son of eugenics advocate and Nazi bankroller Prescott Bush, this is all documented, by the way, chaired a committee urging world population control. Just 1 year later, Henry Kissinger, National Security Advisor to President Nixon, issued National Security Memorandum 200, calling for a reduction of the populations of the lesser developed countries